Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. The inauguration of President-elect Donald Trump raises many questions with regard to his anticipated policy toward the Middle East. Today we will discuss and analyze what may be the course of action toward the incoming American president with regard to the Middle East. And to do so, I'm joined here in the studio by Ms. Paula Slier, Middle East Bureau Chief for Russia Today. Welcome.
Thank you.
I'd like also to welcome our TV7 analyst, Mr. Amir Oren. Welcome.
Thank you.
And also, I'd like to welcome Mr. Etgar Levkovits, Middle East analyst and former correspondent for the Jerusalem Post. Welcome.
Thank you.
I'd like to give you the opportunity, give us a little bit of understanding of how much of a significance will this transition be now that President-elect Trump is inaugurated as president. How will the policy really drastically change with regard to the Middle East?
It's been more than 10 weeks since the stunning victory of November 8, and we seemingly had enough time to transition into the Trump presidency along with the victor himself. But as Donald Rumsfeld used to say, there are known unknowns, and this is one of them, because the full 5 W's are there. Who, when, where, what, and why. We don't know any of the answers, and because some of his nominees to key positions in foreign policy and national security have voiced opinions which deviated from his own platform, we are still trying to grope for some idea as to how this administration will unfold.
Ms. Slier?
I think I would go one step further. It's not just that nominees deviated from his position. Donald Trump himself has contradicted himself on numerous occasions. The big questions, if we're looking specifically at some of the foreign policy platforms he's put out there, are the question mark over whether or not he'll move the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, the question of whether or not he'll tear up, as he threatened to do, the Iranian deal. And I think exactly as Amir was saying, it's not clear because there's contradictory statements coming from the administration. And now that Trump is in office, just how good is he going to make on certain threats/promises that he made in his run-up to be elected president?
Mr. Etgar Levkovits, how do you see this situation evolve from a president that declared and pursued a policy of leading from behind to a president that seeks or claims to seek in various platforms a more active role?
Absolutely. I think this is going to be a big change in the next 4 years. It's not only that we're going from a Democratic president to a Republican president. This is a complete sea change because you're looking at somebody who is a president who hasn't the normal background of past presidents, having worked in the Congress or in the Senate, someone who's a complete outsider, a businessman, a real estate mogul who breaks all the usual stereotypes and normal causes of action. And I think that what we're going to see is something very different. And yes, he's very volatile and he is very explosive at times, but I think we're also going to see a lot of movement that's not usually expected.
Mr. Amir, I'd like to shift the view to how do they perceive him here in the Middle East now that he's become president? Will this really be a significant change in their perception?
Well, obviously, if there are people who claim to be Trump experts, they can get premium dollar in the Gulf and other places, at least until they are proven wrong. But if you look at Donald Trump, he's 70 years old. He is not going to change his habits, and he's quite sure of himself because he has gotten where he is by using some practices which he now wants to copy into the field of governance. For instance, he's taking somewhat extreme positions in order to then negotiate and deal his way out of these positions. Rather than be sensible, stake some linear continuation of the previous administration's policy and carefully negotiate, which is why he's open in position. But you can't really predict where he's going to end.
Nevertheless, he defined the Middle East as a bad investment. How do people in the Middle East look at President Trump and say, okay, we are a bad investment? How can we now expect him to come and be more involved in a situation where he may just cut us out and change course?
Now that he's in office, he will have to consider the other players. Russia's Putin, Turkey's Erdogan, Israel's Netanyahu, at least for the time being, and all the rest. So he's not a free agent, and he has to take into account other people, other interests, other moves. If he doesn't take the initiative, someone else will, and he will have to respond, which is at least a bit too early to try and judge his first move.
Ms. Slier?
I think one of the scenarios that people are painting, and I think it's likely to come true, is that he is, if we go with what he's saying, going to remove the United States further out of what is happening in this part of the world, which is quite ironic because that was the policy of Obama. Had Clinton won, chances are we might see the United States a little bit more involved if we are to go by the platforms that Trump is putting forward there. So what we're likely to see is America getting less involved. He keeps talking about his slogan, America First. He's defined his domestic agenda in very narrow terms. What does that mean for the region itself? It means that nobody really knows how the cards are going to fold. And I'm not so sure that Trump really cares. I don't mean to put that out so blatantly, but you are going to have predictably a number of regional players coming to the fore. You mentioned Russia, so Russia is going to move in where the United States has moved out, but you're going to have regional players such as Turkey having an opportunity now, Egypt, Sisi, your strong men. And I think Trump doesn't really mind who he makes alliances with as long as it meets his own agenda.
Mr. Levkovits?
Well, I think it's very interesting if you look at what's happening now in the Middle East. All of the different countries in the region, the moderate countries who were the erstwhile allies of America, all of them, for one reason or another, were extremely disappointed with the President Obama. So you have something that really binds not only Israel, but Arab countries, moderate Arab countries such as Jordan and Egypt, the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia. All of these countries really feel betrayed by Obama from one way or the other. And the only ones who basically are very pleased with the outcome in the last 8 years are actually the people, the rogue regimes. Syria's Assad is pretty happy. So, and then of course Iran with the Iranian nuclear deal. So I think that there's a lot of anticipation now, even though, as you mentioned, that he doesn't really want to be involved with the Middle East and in the Middle East. But I think that we're seeing now actually, wow, all of these countries are united in anticipation of a new president and a new change, even if he's not full-throated and full force paying attention to the Middle East.
Mr. Oren, Mr. Levkovits just pointed to something very interesting. Nobody doubts the American supremacy when it comes to their military capabilities, but the greatness of America has been lost when it comes to the Middle East. The perception of America as a great power has been subsided with Russia, with China, with other major world powers that had interests here once, have decided to come back in various platforms and have ensued this vacuum basically by filling it through the various conflicts and using the various tools at their disposal. Do you believe that Trump will, on the one hand, as Ms. Slier has claimed that or said, that Trump wants to move out, but at the same time change the perception when it comes to the United States in inserting the greatness of America once more?
Well, the term impression that you use, of course, is all important to him. He apparently has a great emphasis on looks. He's trying to fill his administration through central casting. If you look like a Secretary of State, if you're a general in the Secretary of Defense's role, so much the better. The problem is history is not fair. For the last 16 years or so, ever since 9/11, the United States has been heavily involved in the Middle East. One can go even further to 1991, Desert Shield, Desert Storm. And because of this involvement, it is now retrenching because there is no popular support within the United States for what is involved in money, in material, in men, boots on the ground. And the problem with Trump up to now, it is yet to be seen, is that it doesn't have a holistic approach. One doesn't see how he can integrate the various issues about which he spoke. He has some idea about the Arab-Israeli conflict, some idea about Daesh, ISIS, some idea about Syria perhaps, and all the rest. But how does he tie it all in? Because you have so many different allies and rivals who may change alliances and rivalries in various settings, that one must have the Kissingerian mind of a foreign policy artist, not only the artist of the deal, which Trump prides himself on being, but someone with a broad brush approach to policy and history. And maybe someone within the administration will come up with such an approach, but it is yet to be seen.
Ms. Slier?
I agree with that. I don't think that Trump necessarily positions himself or wants to position the United States as the global policeman or the leader of the free world. He's not he's not trying to live up to any of those kind of ideals, if one can say. He's much more pragmatic in terms of what he wants to get out of the region. One of the comments he has made repeatedly is that his priority is to fight terrorism, and that would touch on his agenda in Syria, but it would also look at what happens with Iran. And Amir, you mentioned the contradictory statements. On the one hand, he's spoken in the past about tearing up the Iranian nuclear deal, but you need Iran. Well, you're going to be siding with Iran if you follow what Trump is suggesting, and that is, in other words, coming on the side of Russia in Syria. So there are those contradictory statements and platforms he's positioning on his foreign policy agenda. We mentioned also the strongmen of the Middle East. I think he sees himself as a strongman. I think he certainly sees himself as a man who likes to do deals. And the other people who fit that portfolio would be Putin, would be Egypt's Sisi, would potentially be Assad, but it would be people that he's prepared to turn a bit of a blind cheek to, who are authoritarian leaders, because he feels that they can address the terrorism issue in their own country and deal with it. And it's another reason or another way that he can remove the United States further out of conflicts that it's embroiled in at the moment.
And he's also using family members the way Middle East monarchs are used to, which gives them a sense of confidence that they can deal with him on their level.
Mr. Levkovits?
I think that the president will only be involved in the Middle East as much as he needs to be. His focus will obviously be America first, domestically oriented. But as we know from the past, whether U.S. presidents want to or not, the events internationally and abroad clearly affect them, and therefore he has to deal with these issues. Whether it be, the mess that's going on in Syria and the whole violence in the region, because if you just turn a blind eye to the violence that's going on here, it obviously will encroach and it'll reach your shores, as we see what's happening in Europe and also in the U.S. today.
On a domestic level, usually a president receives 100 days of grace. Do you believe that those 100 days will be also applied to the Middle East?
He hasn't given 70 days of grace to the outgoing administration, the Obama administration, and he obviously is not going to get any period of grace from his detractors, from protesters, or from the Democrats on Capitol Hill. The America which he wants to make great again is probably the America of the 1950s, of the Eisenhower era, after World War II, but before the problems of Vietnam and Watergate. And this kind of America, which was white only, almost, at least in looks, was the time where Britain and Great France were the powers leading in the Middle East, right just before the decline. Apparently, he doesn't want to get involved in the Middle East to the extent that earlier administrations from Lyndon Johnson on, Nixon and others did. But whether he can juggle that with his domestic policies, with the budget that he wants passed, with what he wants to do with his Supreme Court nominee and many other issues, that will decide the amount of support that he will get domestically.
Ms. Slier?
I think that he won't be in a rush to do anything dramatic. I think he needs to get his cards in order. But if you look at the different issues he needs to address in the Middle East, for example, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I think there's a lot of expectation here in Israel that he comes out with at least some statements. I think the Palestinians are waiting to see what he says. It doesn't mean that he necessarily needs to do anything, but is he at least going to come out and say that he supports a two-state solution? Is he going to make an announcement about what he's doing with the embassy? Again, it doesn't have to lead to any kind of action, but there's some sense that there needs to be statements made so at least people know where they stand. Saudi Arabia is very nervous. Saudi Arabia wants to know what's happening with the Iran deal, as of course does Iran. And again, he might
Israel.
not, and Israel and the rest of the world. But he might not come out and necessarily do anything about it, but I think people want to have some kind of sense of where he's going. But it goes back right to what we were saying at the beginning of the conversation. He might not know where he's going, and he might be very cautious in actually saying something that later he would have to backtrack. It's one thing to have said statements when you were campaigning to be president. It's quite a different thing to say them now.
Mr. Levkovits?
Yes, I think his 100-day grace period ended before it began. I don't think he had even 1 week of grace. Because of all the controversies swirling above his head regarding Russia and the leaks with the CIA, and just the fact that there was so much contest over the election results and the tumult that happened itself. Vis-a-vis the Middle East, I think he has so much on his plate right now that this is really not his first agenda. Obviously, it's always going to be there. It's always going to be a major issue. And of course, the most pressing issue, which I think we'll be hearing about in the coming months, will be the move, of course, as was mentioned, the move of the embassy to Jerusalem, because if he does issue the waiver, then he has to do it by summer. So basically, we have a 6-month grace period sort of where he has to either does it or he'll actually make the move.
Mr. Oren, I'd like to touch base on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who actually defined this transition as a positive thing for Israel. Donald Trump has, of course, promised to shift the policy from the U.S. administration in a more positive, pro-Israeli is the word that he used. How do you see this dynamic between the current administration of U.S. President Donald Trump to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government?
Well, Netanyahu's legal problems notwithstanding, Netanyahu, Trump, all of us here must be more modest in our predictions. If you look back several administrations ago, Bush, Clinton, Bush Jr., Obama, each of them in their first year or so in office were surprised by something in the Middle East. It could be Saddam Hussein or the Oslo process or 9/11, or when Obama went to the Middle East, not immediately, but right after it, the Arab Spring. None of them planned for it, and we cannot know what crisis will ensue here. But even if we look at things as they are today, Netanyahu doesn't know whether what Trump has declared that he was going to do will be only the opening shot for which he will have to compensate. For instance, you mentioned the embassy move. Provided he does go on with this provocative, explosive step, which could bring about demonstrations throughout the Middle East, riots against U.S. embassies region-wide, what will Trump do in order to placate the Arabs and especially the Palestinians? What sort of concession is he going to give them? Is it going to be to Netanyahu's liking, or is Netanyahu going to a summit, to a conclave with Trump in order to tell him, listen, don't do it yet, declare that you are preparing, you are in the middle of staff work, that you are not backtracking, but please don't do anything now to upset the apple cart.
Well, I mean, you have Trump, who has his ambassador to Israel, who supports the settler movement. You have Trump having said statements that he doesn't believe the settlements are an impediment to peace. So, of course, coming with that is the concern from Palestinians and many Israelis that this will make the Netanyahu government even more right-wing than it is. Netanyahu certainly feels he has a friend in Trump. But juxtapose that with another scenario where perhaps the Trump administration might make Netanyahu's government more right than even Netanyahu wants it and beholden him even more to the far-right elements within his own coalition. You have the Education Minister Bennett saying, well, the era of a Palestinian state is over. I'm not so sure that Netanyahu necessarily wanted to go that far right. At the same time, in the past, when you had Obama was a useful card for Netanyahu, if I can put it in that way. You just need to say Obama and you get people behind you. If there's any kind of disagreement between Trump and Netanyahu, Trump is not a rallying card to get people behind Netanyahu in the way that Obama was. So I think it's a gift, in inverted commas, to Netanyahu, but it might not be in the long run either.
Mr. Levkovits?
Well, I think that there's tens of millions of supporters of President Trump in America who strongly believe in the Bible and who strongly believe, based on the Judeo-Christian shared values and traditions, and who strongly believe that Israel is America's closest ally in the Middle East. And these people who voted for Trump strongly believe that the U.S. Embassy should be in Jerusalem. So I agree that basically if Prime Minister Netanyahu decides to put the brakes on it, then quietly and tells President Trump, don't do it, then he'll probably hold off. But if it's solely an American decision, he probably will do it based on the fact that these are his supporters in America want him to. His Vice President Pence, is a staunch supporter of Israel, a strong evangelical Christian believer in the Bible and in the rights of Israel and in the rights of Israel to have its own capital and to have the U.S. Embassy in the country's capital is basically a 101. So if it's up to them, they'll probably go ahead and...
But how many election promises can be fulfilled simultaneously? Building the wall with Mexico, keeping immigrants out or kicking illegal aliens, and moving the embassy, and what? How many of those acts could even a circus master perform without crashing?
And if I can just add on to that, it will also be interesting to see how it evolves the relationship between Trump and the American Jewish community. He doesn't have the majority necessarily of Jewish America behind him. So that's also a market that he needs to be aware of, and certainly Netanyahu is all too keenly aware of.
Nevertheless, Levkovits just pointed something very strongly where a majority of Trump supporters have indeed the biblical perception that Jerusalem is the undivided capital of Israel, that the West Bank, the biblical terms, of course, Judea and Samaria, are a part of Israel, and the Palestinians do not have a legitimacy to be there, or at least to withstand Israel from building there. How can you tell Trump not to do something like that when your supporters in the United States support the moves in order to establish here a sovereign Jewish state?
None of those evangelicals is going to shed blood for Israel if war comes because of such policies. We already had the born again...
I'm not sure if none, because I know plenty of evangelical Christians, me included, that have been here and served here in the military.
No, people who come from the United States...
No, absolutely. But I know several who have indeed came from the United States and been part of the military here and
that's fine.
shed blood.
But not people who stand on the sidelines and cheer Israel, but once the balloon goes up, are still in Alabama or Indiana. We had a born-again president in Jimmy Carter. He had a different view altogether. He thought that his mission in life, according to his religion, is to bring peace to the Holy Land. And Israelis are more in tune, usually, to the Jewish American community, which is divided. Most of it, some 70% of it, supports the Democrats. He did Hillary Clinton. And Trump would like to have them on his side if he runs again in 2020. So it may balance itself out. And one more point is that there is always tension between the important and the immediate. The important, for instance, is what's happening with Iran long term. Moderates versus militants. We have the elections soon there. 10 years from now, the agreement is going to expire. This is the important, but the immediate is the terrorist actions of the Revolutionary Guards, the ties with Hezbollah, the arms moved through Syria to Hezbollah. So one has to fine-tune all of that. Perhaps Defense Secretary designate Mattis, who used to be in charge of the Central Command, will be Trump's key man in that regard.
Ms. Slier?
There was a proposal in the past, if I'm not mistaken, it was an American ambassador to Israel who proposed having two American embassies. You could have one in West Jerusalem, where Trump could set up this embassy if he goes ahead with it, and then you could have one in East Jerusalem to placate the Palestinians. I'm not saying that that's necessarily the answer, but there are various ways that you can work your way around
Practically,
this.
they have it. In the Consulate General in East Jerusalem is the American embassy to the West Bank and used to be to Gaza too.
So potentially, if he feels he needs to stay true to the promises that he made to evangelical Christians, having said that, he did backtrack from coming so forward and outwardly saying that he's going to move the embassy later to backtracking. So it goes back to what we're kind of saying here is, what you say and what you do can be two different things.
Mr. Levkovits?
I think that this is a critical issue for him, and I don't think that he's going to backtrack if it's solely up to him. There's a pretty easy solution. As you mentioned, there is an American consulate that is already in operation in Jerusalem. They don't need to build or construct a new embassy or to break any new ground. They basically need to just change the sign on the door from consulate to embassy and have the ambassador and some of his staff make the 45-minute drive up the hills of Jerusalem and work from here. It's obviously a symbolic move. It's not that they need to construct anything big, but this is a huge, huge issue, I think, and I don't think it's one he is going to, pass up on, unless, of course, Prime Minister Netanyahu puts the brakes on it, simply because this is an issue which he knows is one of the main issues for his voters. He's not on other social religious issues such as abortion, such as moral issues. He's not the typical candidate for these voters. Yet, the issue of Israel is what binds them together. The issue of supporting Israel and the issue of being together with Israel. And vis-a-vis Israeli Jews and American Jews, I would just point to a recent poll in the Jerusalem Post which indicated that 80% of the Israeli Jewish public believe that President Trump is going to be a pro-Israel candidate. And I also believe that the bulk of the American Jewish community will certainly unequivocally support a move of the embassy.
Well, we're running out of time, so I'll give each and every one of you the opportunity to have a closing sentence, please, Mr.
Whether or not moving the embassy is the right policy move, his credibility is on the line. And for a new president, it will be very important to show that his word is his bond. And as you say, one can phrase it, it needs not be an embassy, but rather the diplomatic and consular mission to Jerusalem. One can finance it.
But moving the embassy inevitably will evoke reaction not only from the Palestinians but from the Arab world. So it remains to be seen what that reaction is and whether or not it's serious enough for Trump not to make the move. My final comment is that he's a wild card, and the Middle East has so many wild cards as it is that he's just kind of part and parcel of what sometimes is the craziness and unpredictability of this region.
Mr. Levkovits?
It's a watershed election. It completely breaks all convention, and I think we're in for an interesting period ahead.
Well, we are indeed. I don't have too many words to add to what you all have just stated. So I'd like to thank you very much, Ms. Slier, for coming here. Mr. Amir Oren, thank you so very much. Mr. Levkovits, it's been a pleasure. And I'd like also to thank our viewers, and we'll see you on Tuesday. TV7 Israel's mission is to give you, our viewers, truthful information, which in effect will give you a chance to really understand what is happening in Israel and its region. If you're blessed by our programs and believe our mission to be important, we urge you to support us and become a voice for Israel. You can support us by going to our website at tv7israelnews.com. This program was made possible through your donations.